So welcome everybody to the Pathways to Adult Success Solution Forum. We're going to have hopefully a very interesting and informative talk session today, interaction today. Our solution forum has actually started, about 2 years and 9 months ago in response to the pandemic, actually, as a way for folks to come together and share solutions to the emerging challenges coming out of the pandemic in general, and specifically in providing all our students with pathways to adult success. And we just thought it would be a good time to take a step back and sort of cull through all the great solutions that have been shared by our learning community members, both to get a sense of what they are, and also, as I think we're going to see, what they mean collectively for about where we're going or where we can go, and some of the sort of foundational learnings and innovations that have come out of the pandemic that we really want to keep building upon as we move to whatever the future holds. As we've sort of learned, it's less predictable than we once thought. So next slide, Amanda. So we're going to be going through and sharing some of the innovations that folks have been doing over the past couple of years. We'll have some time for you to have a discussion with each other or all of us on some of the things you've been seeing. And then we'll, as we always do, going along, we'll be sharing some resources from our work and others that relate to what we're learning. As always, we have a rich group of folks participating from different sectors, from K-12, higher ed, nonprofits, state departments of education, other areas. We really ask you to share your ideas and resources during chat to make this interactive. You've got, I have a great idea that fits with that. Here it is. Please do that. We'll pause at various points to look at that chat and respond to it, and then we'll have a broader discussion at the end. And as always, we'll send you recordings of the materials and the various resources shared today. So as we, has been saying, this is our normative slide now that, building pathways to adult success for all and with all students has never been so crucial. We know the pandemic has been disruptive to a lot of existing systems. Uncertainties become more the norm, and momentum to and through post-secondary is being impacted. And we know momentum matters, as well as making sure students find the pathway that works for them, right? And not just the one that seems to be available. And as we said, despite the many challenges, this was also a period of innovation. And really that's going to be our focus today. We go to the next slide. And what we did and what we're releasing today is we went through, we looked back across all our past solution forums over the past 2.5 years and really tried to organize it into sort of sections and to highlight these innovations that folks have been sharing. Because again, they were there in that point in time and they were powerful, but it's good to remind ourselves of what they look like collectively together. And also that there was a lot of really good work being done. We don't want that to be lost in the shuffle. So we put it together, we organized it into 4 key areas of student success systems, collaborations, post-secondary navigation supports, and data. And we're releasing that report today. You'll be able to download it, which just gives you a sense of a synthesis, really, of all the great work done by our learning community members over the past 2 years and 9 months. All right. And I'm going to now present for each of these areas just sort of a synthesis and some highlights. And the ones I'm highlighting are not because they're the best, but just because they sort of give us a compelling story. But I really encourage you to look at the whole report to look at all the great work and innovations that have been done across all our learning community partners. And the first area, I think, of real innovation that happened during the pandemic is there was a lot of rethinking and a lot of growth and a lot of development and what pre-pandemic we called early warning systems or on-track systems. And really throughout the pandemic, they've been sort of evolving into this idea of what we're now calling student success systems. And some of the key parts of that evolution were really highlighted by a number of our learning community partners in their solution forum presentations. So one of the first parts of this shift of early warning on-track systems was really recognition that we had to forefront the knowledge and the views and the insights of students more than we had in the past. A lot of sort of the foundational early warning on-track systems were based on student records, right? Which is really a record of something that happened in the past. It might have been the near past, last week, very near past, but we use those records to sort of figure out which students are sort of raising their hands, saying they need some supports, and what can we do to help them. And one thing the pandemic taught us is that suddenly everyone was experiencing challenges from the pandemic, and everyone experienced the pandemic, but everyone was experiencing the pandemic differently. And it was evolving very rapidly and shifting very quickly, which meant we had no record data to guide us, right? Many of those traditional measures weren't there of attendance or even course performance. And that really told us that we had to depend in many ways, which show themselves to be the best piece of data overall, was the students themselves. So our friends at the Network for College Success, for example, presented to us how they've really forefronted getting student voice into their sort of efforts to keep kids on track in the 9th grade, and how important to meet students where they are, to anchor plans about what students experience in the school, and to really use this idea of developmental relationships, which many of our folks sort of built on, is anchoring. And yes, everyone got a copy of the PowerPoint. And they made the case that the secret sauce now was elevating student voice, right? That if we elevate and center student voice, we create a space for adults to reflect and improve their practice. And if we improve learning conditions for young people, then we create better classroom, more equitable experiences. And that leads to a lot of important outcomes, right? And so, again, that was lived experience at really centering student voice. Not only we needed to know what's going on, but also it was some of the really best insight in how to improve classroom conditions so everyone can thrive. Next slide. And right with that, to show that this was like in the air, right? It was a thing everyone was trying to figure out. Our friends from CORE and the Breakthrough Success community shared a tool they developed for measuring these student and adult developmental relationships. And again, building off the work of the Search Institute and their understanding of developmental relationships, they took these core ideas of what is a good developmental relationship, which you can see in front of you, and with that created a tool. We go to the next slide, which lets schools and others know, and as you can see, this is done 3 times a year. So it's sort of, that was, it gets to this other key learning from the pandemic, is that students' relationships, students' needs, students' experiences are very dynamic. And data points from the start of the year are not necessarily data points from the middle of the year. And so they're 3 times a year, they're surveying their students and asking them about the strength of their relationships with adults and each other, and created a way, sort of a dashboard to see where it is. And even within that, in the bottom row, among the various components of a strong developmental relationship, what is the current sort of state of affairs? Next slide. So that idea of like centering student voice and student insights is really foundational to our next sort of generation of these student success systems, was a big part of the pandemic learning. And another foundational pandemic learning that happened across many of our learning collaborators, and we all are involved in this, was the recognition that we need to collaborate more. In many ways, the pandemic knocked out expertise. No one had lived through a pandemic before, so no one knew what to do. There was no standard operating procedure. There was no, I've done this 10 times, let me tell you what works. Everybody was a novice, and when everyone was a novice, we all learned we had to pool and work together, and we could do much more together than by ourselves. And I think that's a very important sort of spirit to continue, and there's many examples of it happening. One of them is the grad partnership, which sort of emerged out of this period, where a lot of the folks that have done work on early warning on-track systems have come together to say, again, we can do more together than apart, and really how do we take all these learnings from the pandemic and other developments in adolescent development that were sort of occurring in the knowledge base at the same time, and create these sort of high quality student success systems, and build the means to help folks sort of know about them and use them. And what this grad partnership work, it's came together and saying it's really, you got to bring 4 things together. This focus on strong relationships, which we saw in our first 2 examples, with real-time actionable data and having a more expansive view of what that data is. It is that, traditional ABCs still matter. But we also have a different version of the ABCs and things like agency and belonging and connectedness, and also just the insights from students and themselves. We need to build improvement systems that are sort of strategic in their response, and we need to have a shared set of student-centered mindsets. And as when we integrate all this together, we really create that system that keeps all kids on that pathway to adult success. Next slide. And a little bit of the nitty-gritty of how this works, right, is this idea it's a team of adults. And again, that is that collaboration is central, but no one individual can figure this out. It is that team with different views. We really need to progress monitor all kids. It's not just some kids. It's not just the kids we think we know. It's like the pandemic told us that all kids have challenges. And we also know from the pandemic, the tail effects are going to be very unpredictable. We just don't know. What about those kids, for example, that essentially missed 6th grade because that was the 2021, the height of the pandemic year, right? Well, we know from a lot of prior research that kids that struggle in 6th grade, absent getting better supports, may struggle to graduate. But humans are adaptable and resilient. So maybe it won't be an issue, but maybe it will. And those kids don't hit 9th grade till next year, right? So there's going to be a lot of sort of long lags to the pandemic. So we really have got to, pay attention to everybody, right? Not just some folks. And on that more expansive set of indicators. And then we really have to co-create our improvement actions, right? With the folks, that other insight that no one knows more than the people living it themselves, and we need to bring them into the solution and then keep working it, right? Until we get something that works. All right, next slide. And as part of that, this grad partnership has developed a team reflection tool, which really lets teams sort of look at their existing student support systems and asks a series of guided questions about relationships, actionable data, improvement systems, mindsets, and lets them build upon what they have. Because everybody has something good. And in the end of the day, we like to say, the best student success system is going to be the one you create at your school. But this just helps them sort of have those conversations that help them get there. Right. Third thing in this category, right, that we think about, we need to center students more. We need to have more dialogue with students. We need to build stronger relationships with students. We got to increase that sense of connection and belonging and agency. We've got to progress monitor and be strategic. And at many levels, that just tells us we need more people doing this, right? Because again, we know one of the fundamental challenges pre-pandemic and continues post-pandemic is pre-pandemic, we had congregated many of our students with the greatest number of life challenges in a subset of schools, not really designed for everyone to have a life challenge, right? Which is often the case. And that says we need more people in those schools playing those support roles. So another innovation that came out during the pandemic was people rethinking about new roles for adults to play in schools that's somewhere between, it's not a teacher, it's not a counselor, it is a student support person of different ways. And in this case, our friends at City Year are reimagining what their core members do into student success coaches, really, which are both giving students individual academic and social emotional supports. And as we found in some research during the pandemic, one of the most powerful things, and this makes all those other things we've shown connect together, was just the power of being there. That so much of what those core members were able to do was provide in the moment supports to students when the students needed them in school, right? The day after something bad happened at home, or the day during when they got teased in school, or the day, whatever, when they struggled in classroom. It's to be right there in that moment, to use that as both support and sort of, assistance, that makes big difference. And that's this idea of creating new categories of human capital, if you will, or different ways to think about getting more adults involved in schools in different capacities in these student support roles. Next slide. And, again, it's through a wide range of these relationships and, it's very multi-personal. We often say it's sort of like the Marines of student supports, right? You do a little bit of everything in a connected way. We can just move on to the next one more. And the last example in this category is taking us even bigger, is the work being done with the National Partnership for Student Success, which is responding to the president's call in his last State of the Union address to have 250,000 more adults serve as mentors and tutors and success coaches and post-secondary advisors and supports, and figuring out, again, how we bring community organizations and schools and the folks that can provide these supports together in a way, again, to get those additional adults in schools, providing those student supports, tied together by student success systems, really focusing on building out the connections with and the insights from the students themselves. So that's sort of, if you put all the pieces together for our solution forms, I think you get a very big innovative change in how we're thinking about this idea of supporting students through school into post-secondary. I'm going to pause there for a moment and give people an opportunity to either ask a question in chat, or to think of innovation you've seen during the pandemic or been a part of that's really addressed this idea of supporting student success and keeping them on a pathway to adult success.
So Carol says, changing teaching and learning through equitable grading and instruction.
Yeah, right. And that's definitely was a thing that was challenged during the pandemic, right? Because again, the whole nature of assignments and even tests were, when we were virtual and hybrid and all kinds of things, right? Just scramble those traditional ways, and the ways that created opportunities, right, for improvement. Yeah. So many things we thought were non-negotiable, we sort of suddenly learned were quite negotiable, right? And that's really trying to figure out how we, what we take and what we build upon. All right. I think I'll move us on to the next section and we'll continue the conversation. So the other area where we saw a lot of innovations from our solutions forum and our learning community members sort of fit in this category of bringing sort of K-12 nonprofit and higher ed together. This idea of it, it's not really, we don't have villages, but we have communities, and that's what it takes. And why that was so essential and became really so dramatic during the pandemic, right? Again, is because the level of uncertainty became so high that, again, kids didn't know what was the right decision. Should I stay close to home? Should I go away? I'm enjoying work. I took a job during the pandemic to help support my family because they were, frontline workers, and I actually gained a lot of agency from that. And I just assumed keep working. Is that the right decision? How do we connect that person to a life after that job? Again, this idea of existing systems not working or being scrambled, causing folks to figure out new ways to create collaborations between sectors that in the past have been relatively independent. So one example that really took hold during the pandemic came from our friends from the National Education Equity Lab. And it was rethinking sort of dual enrollment. And what their innovation was, and it's very interesting that this started a year before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, it was like ready to go, which was that in this case, the core course is delivered online from a major university, and it's the same class that students at university are taking. And it's delivered in a classroom supported by a co-teacher. So kids are together in a classroom thing, they're not just independently on their own computers. And there's some supports built in. But that infrastructure then enabled this actually to be one thing that was actually able to grow during the pandemic, right? Because it already had these sort of online features built in, they didn't have to go to them. So if we go to the next slide, it shows you the elements they brought together, right? To bring all these partners together to create the web of supports needed. So the idea is to take courses from sort of major universities, deliver them as they're delivered at their university, but in an online format. Kids in Title I high schools take them in a classroom with a co-teacher. They're supported, though, by a university teaching fellow. So they get those TA supports you would get in college, right? So it gives them that other layer of support now being provided by graduate students. And then they weave in a host of other organizations supporting sort of that navigation to college. Next slide. And again, we can see this is bringing the sectors together, right? The colleges and the universities, the various support partners, and then the Title I high schools, and creating really new connections that didn't exist before. And I think one of the key learnings here, and it's an example of where online, which got, good and bad things happened online during the pandemic, but certainly we're all here, we're all much more used to using Zoom for learning and communicating. This enabled a lot of boundaries to be broken. So one of the findings is that why a lot of kids that go to Title I high schools don't end up applying to more selective colleges, even if they want to go or they feel they're qualified, is because those colleges and universities have no prior relationship with that high school. No one from that high school has ever gone to that college or university. And colleges and universities basically go to places where they have a track record. And if a track record doesn't exist, it's hard to get started. And this really broke down the friction of creating those relationships and building those track records. So it's an example of combining partnerships and technology in a way that reduce boundaries. And I think we saw a lot of that during the pandemic. Another thing our learning community partners pushed for, developed, had to expand more, was this idea that a lot of the supports we would traditionally give students in high schools, often in 9th grade, were just as much needed in that first year of college. And the realization that in many ways, the first year of college is very much like the first year of high school. And many of the same reasons why kids struggle in the first year of high school is why they struggle in the first year of college. So just as it's important to have people power supporting kids in high school or middle school, our partners found they needed to provide that support in college. So this is an example from our friends at the Chattanooga Education Fund, where they created a series of folks that basically provided student supports, from academics to social emotional to sort of basic guidance, guiding you through the systems at the college level to students they worked with in high school to get them matched to the best university for them. So the idea of continuing the supports into college. And another example of that came from our partner, the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Peninsula, where they connected the two. And basically their innovation was to pick kids up in middle and high school and stay with them through college, really connecting the two dots and having the constant be the nonprofit partner and their sort of coaches who help kids go all the way through and into college. And that's an example, again, of we're finding sort of blurring of these boundaries that we have to break down. This is one institution, that's the other institution, you cross over and we don't have the connections. And here's an example of just how they would sequence this through the years. And again, it's that core idea there that we see again and again, that the pandemic helped us understand even more, which is really the combination of both academic and social emotional and sort of future support. Those three things. Help me think about my future, help me combine my mental health, my social emotional, my personal sense, and with sort of the academics and how interconnected those are. I think the pandemic, again, really highlighted that. And when some of those more like connection things were broken, we saw like how important they were. They were sort of in the background before, and this really brought them to the foreground and highlighted how central. So again, I'm going to pause there in our area of more increased collaboration between sectors to see if anyone has examples to share, questions, other examples of innovations in this space of sort of breaking down and connecting across these sectors.
Yeah, we have a couple of comments in the chat, Bob. John Green from Georgia says that prior to the pandemic, they had implemented a community infrastructure focusing on 4 developmental themes and 3 focused strategies of support: acceleration, tutoring, and mentoring, and 3 specific outcome expectations for graduation. And then they were able to apply that base model in several rural districts. Yeah, we also have a comment from Carol that, hold on. that the Ed Equity Lab courses that you mentioned not only boost students' confidence, but open their awareness to post-secondary opportunities outside of their neighborhood.
Yeah, right, very much so. That's this idea of that breaking sort of the isolation, right? It's very interesting. In many ways, people felt, and and they were, in fact, people were very isolated during the pandemic. At the same time, the greater connections online and sort of through Zoom and other ways created ways to sort of break through some of that sort of geographic isolation, right? And it's a very interesting thing of different ways to think about that isolation and to ways to navigate it.
That's all we have in the chat right now.
Okay, thanks, Ann. All right, and our third area, just go back one, Amanda, thanks. Was this idea of post-secondary navigation supports. And one of the areas, I think, again, where there was a lot of shift during the pandemic, and some of this was happening before, but I think it really led to an acceleration. We go to our next slide now. Sorry, Ann. Sorry, Amanda. Is this idea that we have to give kids options on both college and career, right? And both sort of college and workforce development, and not just have one dominant pathway that you have to learn how to fit and accommodate to. And where I think we've seen acceleration in this, right, is we know that there's sort of been, the first wave of the pandemic, that very first year, a lot of kids, that were looking for guidance in their schools and what to do, were not able to get that guidance because it was all face-to-face. It was all based on face-to-face, the current systems, and sort of, nagging and nurturing kids through to get their applications in or to figure out, to know when to go even to their community college. And that first year, that was lost. And there's still a group of kids that are like struggling because of that, right? And we have to keep thinking about options and opportunities for them. But then as things went on, it led many kids to reconsider again, just this idea that you just reflexively go from high school to college. That's just sort of the way it is. That's what you do. You don't think about it much. You just go. And that led we could just see more kids questioning, more parents questioning. Some of it was tied around to the cost. Some of it was tied around to not wanting to go away from home, given the continuing uncertainty, or just family tragedies where they had to take on more adult roles to support their families coming out of the pandemic. Which then really led people to keep thinking about how do we make sure we have opportunities and pathways for all and are not just saying it's like one-way college highway or good luck. So anyways, a number of our folks presented ideas around combining both college and career preparation, right? And as early as possible. So we had one example was the On Track to Career Success effort, which is working with schools in New Mexico and Louisiana and trying to figure out how to give a series of grade level career exposures, applications, experiences, leading to an industry certification or apprenticeship, and then pathways, multiple pathways from there, and the ability to cross-sector collaborations to sustain it. And if we go to the next slide, one of the sort of things that, again, were almost like it was pandemic enabled. You don't want to say that because the pandemic had so many difficult, tragedies tied to it. But during that time, some of that work that was planned to do couldn't happen because they couldn't have those face-to-face dialogues between an employer and a school and a partner and figuring out how do we build these local pathways. So some of the work shifted to saying, let's use this time to do some sort of like design thinking and think about what would a series of grade by grade milestones for 9th through 12th grade look like, where there'd be both academic, social, emotional, and college and career and sort of relationship building, and what might that sequence look like? And that enabled groups of teachers from across the country, right, because we now have the Zoom enabled world, to work together in a design thinking thing to work on these milestones. And from that they came up with some very very interesting ideas and powerful ideas. And related to what that group project was doing was what we learned from our friends from Prep KC in Kansas City, which is really trying to tackle this question of how do we provide these experiences for all kids and not just some kids? Because so much of our sort of traditional career exposure, development, internships, job shadowing, apprenticeships, was designed for some kids, and progress often would be seen if we can move from 10% of kids doing this to 15% of kids doing this, right? That was 50% increase, nothing to sneeze at. But if we really are saying we want to give kids equal opportunities, equal options, everybody needs those experiences, right? Not just some. So a number of our partners are trying to think through, how do you make this be everyone and not some? And our friends at Prep KC were sort of at the forefront of that work, really working with their community and their school systems to, again, create this sequence of things going back from 3rd grade through 12th grade that they envisioned all kids moving through, not just some kids. And perhaps the most interesting part of this is this thing they're calling MVAs. If we go to the next slide, which they're calling as market value assets. And it's trying to say that every kid gets one of them. And what they're doing, and they're thinking of saying, we want to get to all kids a market value asset. They might get there in different ways. The reality is we're not going to be able to scale each of these individual ways to every kid, because everything has its limitations and its challenges and its issues. So they thought of 4 areas. It could be an industry recognized credential. It could be an internship or a client project. It could be 9 or more college credits. They're talking about 3 linked CTE courses, 3 credits each. That's what that really means. Or they have these scholarships that sort of speak to that. And so then what they're trying to think out, we go to our final slide, is how do we think about the model for going to scale, both on supply, it's a combination of creating new programs, scaling existing opportunities, and upgrading things that were, have the potential to become this full MVA or market value asset, as they said. And then how do we build demand, right? Because, we're sort of assuming it's a good thing for kids to have all these experiences, but maybe the kids have a different idea. So you have to also think through how to give them the exposures and to sort of break, again, some of that isolation to get them to want to do this, right? So just a lot of interesting innovation and thought going on with that. And then the final thing, or maybe the second final thing in this area, is that, okay, we get this sense that we want to give our kids a wider range of sort of career development opportunities throughout their schooling, but that takes time. And many of our kids' schedules don't give them that time. Coming up to the pandemic, everyone was still pretty much tied to their Carnegie units. And I know in some states, seat time, other states, they don't have that, but in many cases, there wasn't a lot of time in the schedule for students to do some of that more explorational, out in the world learning. So a number of our Pathways to Adult Success learning community partners who worked in the State Department shared with us some state innovations that were occurring during this time. They really were trying to create the space for those other experiences to happen. And one of those came from our friends in Ohio. They were both giving credit flexibility to be able to award credit for non-traditional courses, and the idea of expanding simultaneous credit, where you could get 2 credits for the same course, often a CTE course and a core course, all to the point of freeing up space in the schedule to do more of those experiential things, right? So that's to get to one innovation, we need other innovations, and some of that was happening. And another example came from our friends in New Hampshire, who built out their extended learning opportunities, or Learn Everywhere idea. And if we go to the next slide, was really this idea that kids are learning, and this, again, the pandemic demonstrated this, they kept learning, but often in non-traditional ways, right? Non-traditional school-based ways. And New Hampshire's thought through ways, how do we recognize the learning that's happening in independent study and internships and community services, even things like being on a dance team, right? If you're on a dance team and you're spending lots of time on that, doesn't that cover PE in some ways, right? That's the way they're thinking. So they're trying to move towards this time of any time, place, method, but to tie it together, go to the next slide, they are building out a process. It's not just, oh, you do this, you come to us and say you did this, and we'll give you a credit. They're creating a system or a way to sort of create some experiences behind that experiential learning that helps them know that, you know, we are okay giving you a credit for this. We're not just sort of saying, you know, give us anything. It's you know, they're providing some structure at the same time they're opening up many more possibilities. And that's, I think, a core idea of a lot of the innovations we saw, right? We want to create much more access and much more flexibility, but we also want to keep something that says that there's a little bit of constancy and commonality at the center of this. All right. So again, we'll pause there to see if folks have any other experiences, ideas in this space of how do we create more experiences for our kids to give them more different pathways they may want to take, and how do we sort of give them, you know, good experience and guidance, right, to make informed choices so they're engaged in where they go after high school to a pathway to adult success that they both care about and brings them to sort of a good future. All right, we're going to quickly do data, and we're going to give you a chance to talk to each other. It's just so it's it. So the last thing that we thought there was a little bit of a didn't quite fit in any of those categories, or maybe it did, or maybe it cut across them. But data, thinking about data in new ways, has always been at the heart of a lot of the pathways to adult success work. So just highlighting two final innovations, and one we've talked about a little bit, but I want to come back to, is really this emergence of this idea of sort of the ABCs of student engagement, right? And we just saw, again, the pandemic just demonstrated like how if students are not engaged, they're not learning, right? And the ability that students had, the agency to sort of tune off in the Zoom world, where they could turn their screen off and be away and with sort of impunity, and the extent to which that happened, showed us how, like, if they're not engaged, they're not learning, right? It's just, and also coming out of that, and also tied to advances in adolescent development, was really this idea of agency, belonging, and connectedness are really essential to that engagement, right? And of those, one, the school connectedness idea, why I think this is also a powerful sort of innovation in thinking, is that the very strong evidence that says students are connected to school when they believe there's an adult who knows and cares about them as a person, when they have a supportive peer group, where they're engaged in pro-social activities where their actions help others, and they feel welcome in school for who they are. The school accepts them for who they are. They don't have to change to be in school. And I think the important thing about this is that all of these are knowable at a school level in a non-burdensome way. The adults in a school can quickly know, who do none of us know. They can quickly know, or they already know, just share their knowledge, who do we always see alone? Who is not engaged in any extracurricular activity, right? And maybe a survey on belonging. You put that together, you actually have a way of knowing where you are to figure out ways to get where you want to go, right? So it takes it from being sort of an esoteric concept that's describing a very fundamental needs for human belonging and agency and connection, in a way that's sort of actionable at the school level. And I think that's what sort of makes for a powerful sort of innovation of thinking of what we need to do and where we need to put our supports. All right. And then tied to this in a way, and bringing us back to where we started with our friends from Chicago and the idea of elevating student voice, is a little bit expanding our idea of what data is, right? And again, like sort of pre-pandemic, we sort of saw data as numbers and as things in a record, or scores on a test. But data is also what we learn in in-depth conversations between students, teachers, and parents. And one of the schools that this is part of our partnership, part of our learning community, Manzano High School in Albuquerque, developed over the pandemic. They sort of turned early warning systems on their head a little bit. And where in the traditional early warning system, you're looking at data for kids and then thinking about, what we could do at the whole school level, what can we do for intermediate, small group level, and then, who do we have to then deal with at an individual level? And what they said is, let's first talk to a large sample, on the order of 200 kids. It's about a 1,200 student school that are having, some challenges of one sort or another. And let's have a conversation with them and their parents and the teachers in a very positive light, very positive, asset-based way, friendly way. Many of the kids would say, like, I was really scared. And then it was like, the best day of my life, because it was totally different than what I thought it would be. Just to really understand what's behind these things that are causing concern. And from that, they were then able, because their sample was big enough and in depth enough, really getting in deeply behind it, they were then able to see pretty clearly areas where, oh yeah, that's affecting a lot of our kids, and we can try to address it at this level, at the classroom level. Or yeah, that's affecting even more, and we can address it at the school level. Or, all kids in a certain category, this is impacting. And so they just sort of inverted it and saying, we're going to begin with in-depth conversations first and use that to learn about what we should be doing at higher levels. And again, that's just an example of sort of another powerful innovation that sort of occurred that we think, there's a lot to learn from. So what I think we're going to do now, because you heard a lot of talking from me, and there's a lot of insight in this room, is we're just going to put you in a breakout room for maybe 7 minutes. It's very simple. You just rapidly introduce yourselves and share an innovation that you've heard about, saw, experienced, designed yourself during the pandemic that has implications and importance for us to keep doing and building upon as we go on to our next set of challenges and adventures. And we'll just bring everybody back, and after 7 minutes, have a little dialogue and share some what's coming next. Welcome back. As people come back, if anybody wants to share out in the chat one great innovation you heard, please feel free to do it if you so choose. We can share them out that way. And as people are doing that, if they so choose, it's also our open discussion and resource. If you have any current resources on pathways to adult success you want to share with the learning community, please do that as well. We're putting in the chat again the link to the innovation report we're releasing today, which this was just a little sampling of. I encourage you to look at that, and it just tries to bring together what our innovations from the pandemic from our learning community. And there's just a wealth of good insights in there that we just sampled a little bit of today. And I just, in closing, I just want to say that, we all lived through it. We wouldn't wish it on anybody. There was a lot of tragedy, but we just wanted to highlight today that there was also, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And a lot of, I think, powerful innovations were accelerated or started. And our work now is to really capture and build upon those. And if you think about it, some recurring themes are definitely this idea of, we've got to more deeply integrate students into their own learning. So it's sort of with them, it's not to them. The importance of this sort of idea of, engagement is driven by agency and belonging and connectedness, and that we can shape that and build that in our schools. The sense that collaboration is essential, and that we were able to do a lot when we were all novices, and we shouldn't lose that, and we shouldn't fall back into our little hierarchies of expertise and just do it because that's what we're told to do. And that breaking those institutional boundaries, which is so much essential to this work of really building pathways to adult success for our kids, because their pathway goes through K-12, through higher ed, through the workforce, through nonprofits connecting and supporting along the way. That's their journey. We've tended to make that very broken by having everyone be in their institutional silo. That doesn't really do any good for us or for them. So really thinking more ways to break down, to work collaboratively to create those pathways in a student-focused way, not sort of what serves the institution they stop in along the way. And again, I think the pandemic helped just drive home the human importance of that. So just in closing, we will have another solution forum. We don't think we have a date yet, but it'll be in February or early March. We have our Designing Education podcasts. Our most recent one is out with Mentor, and it really speaks to this idea of building quality relationships with students and adults. So it really extends upon what we have. And with that, I would just conclude by saying, as we do, onward and be well. And thank you for being with us here today.